is Monday, February 24th, 2020. This is an interview with Raymond Lowrie, who is a mining engineer and former Assistant Director and Regional Director of the Office of Surface Mining. He was also the Chief of the Intermountain Field Operations Center for the U.S. Bureau of Mines. I'm Barbara Filas, and I've known Ray for many years, and I'm honored to get to tap into Ray's professional background as part of the American Institute for Mining, Metallurgical, and Petroleum Engineers Oral History Project. We're here in downtown Phoenix, Arizona, attending the SME annual meeting and exhibit, and now we'll be discussing Ray's mining sector experiences and his impressive contributions to the industry. Let's take a big step back, Ray, and let's talk a little bit about where you're from and how you grew up and that sort of thing.
I was actually born in Alcoa, Tennessee, back during Depression days, and my dad worked at the Aluminum Company of America plant in Alcoa, Tennessee. He made $8 a week. This was Depression days. We moved around a little bit as a young person, but my dad ended up with a job in Texas, first in Dallas. So we moved to Dallas, and my early grade school years mostly was in Dallas. Then he got transferred to El Paso, Texas, out West Texas, which was quite a move for my parents, because both of them were from southern Appalachian states. My mother from western North Carolina, she was raised on a tobacco farm, and my dad from East Tennessee. Here they are in West Texas. We didn't know for how long, but as it turns out, we were there for quite a long time. I grew up there in El Paso, Texas.
Did you have siblings?
I do. I have a brother who is he's still living. He was a professor at Penn State. I have two sisters. Older sister, she's passed away, and a younger sister also passed away. So that's my siblings. And my older sister was born also in Alcoa, Tennessee. My brother in North Carolina, and my younger sister in El Paso.
So I'm going to ask you what influenced you to become an engineer, but before I ask you that, because I think you mentioned that you were in the Navy, and that might have had something to do with your decisions on your career path.
Correct. I graduated from high school in May of 1950. 1 month later, the Korean War broke out. I went down and tried to join the Marine Corps, but I was only 17 years old, and you have to have parental consent. My dad wanted me to go to college. So I started college, turned 18, joined the Navy instead of the Marine Corps. I did 4 years in the Navy. One of the significant, and towards the end of the 4 years, I spent a year in Yokosuka, Japan. One of the officers that I was under, I was a second class aerographer's mate. Aerographer meaning aerology, weatherman. This officer that I was under was a graduate of New Mexico School of Mines. He knew I was about to get out of the Navy, and so he put the rush on me to go to Socorro, New Mexico, to be at the New Mexico School of Mines. I gave it serious consideration, but El Paso at that time had the remnant of Texas College of Mines and Metallurgy, which has become the University of Texas, El Paso. They still had a mining program then, and this was during the 50s, during the uranium boom. And uranium, fortunes being made in uranium were in the newspaper all the time. Charlie Steen, the great uranium owner in Moab, Utah, was actually from the school there in El Paso. So, and he was extremely wealthy, multimillionaire. And at that time, and I'm not sure this is the best of reasons to go into a profession, but there was an awful lot of money being made, and it was being publicized, and that drew me into the mining profession. But I started to stay there at El Paso because after having been gone for 4 years, I was kind of homesick, and it seemed prudent to go there to what was then called Texas Western College, now UTEP, University of Texas El Paso. That's how I got into the mining industry.
Yeah.
I got into the industry, I was just into the school. From when you get ready to graduate in most of the mining schools, companies come and interview some of the students that are about to graduate. I was interviewed by Lone Star Steel, which is a steel company that made pipe in East Texas, but they were hiring me for the coal division, which was in eastern Oklahoma. Eastern Oklahoma has very good met coal, metallurgical grade coal, and I went to work for the Lone Star Steel Company in one of the mines was outside of McAllister, Oklahoma, and the other mine was outside of Bocosi, Oklahoma. So I went to work for them as an engineer at those two underground coal mines. It's low coal. So if you ever know anything about working in low coal, that's quite an experience.
I've always thought about low coal as being very claustrophobic. Did you find it that way? A lot of people that work in low coal prefer it because they feel a safer feeling.
It is claustrophobic, and you have to get used to it. But once you do, it's kind of like a group of men. They all love each other. They would die for each other. They would do anything for each other. It's a cult almost, the low coal miners, and it's a good thing. It's a good relationship. It's hard to work under low coal because you're either stooping all the time or working sitting down or on your knees, and of course you wear knee pads. Your knees just go to mush after a few years of working under coal mines and in low coal mines.
Sounds like a young man's job.
It is a young man's job, and I had to quit because I was hurt in an accident. Not a mine accident, it was a car accident. But I was mentioning this earlier. I had 2 broken vertebrae in the small of my back, and I had a crushed heel bone. Your heel bone is a very small bone. Mine was crushed, had 7 breaks in it, and so I was very uncomfortable with a broken back and that broken heel bone, so you just kind of drag in it, working in low coal. And so I got out of there I decided I would become a lawyer. I went back for my convalescent period back to El Paso with my parents, and I had made application to the University of Texas Law School. They wrote me back and said that I needed to have speech and accounting. And so I took those two classes in summer school at UTEP, getting ready to go to law school at the University of Texas. Backing up a little bit, I met this girl in McAllister. She was a teacher in California, but we'd met when she'd come to McAllister and spent the Christmas holidays in McAllister. We dated every night. So I called her up and asked her to come to El Paso to see me. She did. She flew over to El Paso, and we decided to get married. So there went the law school idea. On a honeymoon, we went from McAllister, Oklahoma to Denver, Colorado. I knew the USGS hired mining engineers in their conservation division because we had some federal coal in Oklahoma, and they USGS regulated what kind of percentage you would get in the federal coal that you mined. So I knew some of the people in the conservation division of the USGS. I went to their office in Denver, which is in the Denver Federal Center on the west side of town, and walked in, told them who I was, looking for a job, and they said, we don't have any openings right now, but the Bureau of Mines is hiring somebody that's got your background. So I went over there to the Bureau of Mines at the Denver Federal Center, and they seemed very happy. They'd been looking for somebody with my background, underground coal mining, for quite some time. And they said, if you can pass the physical, we'll hire you on the spot. And I said, well, good. So my wife and I went back down to El Paso, and I got to our old family doctor to agree that I could pass the physical, and did all the paperwork. And we went back to Denver, and that's when I started with the government, with the Bureau of Mines, which does not exist anymore. But I worked for the Bureau of Mines for quite some time. I stayed in Denver for a while, and I did a lot of interesting Bureau of Mines work there. But I was transferred to D.C., Washington, D.C. headquarters in the Division of Bituminous Coal in Washington, D.C. Stayed there for a while, came back through a promotion back to Denver, and stayed there and for quite some time. Let me talk for some of the things I did. I was a supervisor of the Bureau of Mines Wilderness Program. The 1964 Wilderness Act required that the USGS and the Bureau of Mines evaluate all of the primitive and wilderness areas in the United States. And so we covered, out of Denver, we covered quite a few of the Rocky Mountain states: New Mexico, Arizona, Utah, Colorado, Wyoming. And so there was quite a few wilderness areas in there that I was involved in evaluating for the Bureau of Mines the mineral potential of those areas, along with the USGS. All that work is completed now, but it is published in USGS series of publications of the mineral potential of each of those wilderness areas. Of course, they've been expanded, some of them have been, and additional ones have been added since then. What they're doing on the mineral potential there since then, I don't know. But the 1964 Wilderness Act required the USGS and the Bureau of Mines to evaluate the wilderness areas at that time.
A lot of the USGS and Bureau of Mines publications ended up on the One Mine website. Have you ever Googled your name on that to see how many of those publications come up?
Oh, not on the wilderness areas. I do have a couple of other Bureau of Mines publications, but I haven't Googled for the USGS because as the supervisor, I ran the program, but we had people that were mining engineers subordinate to me actually doing the work. And so their names are the ones on with the USGS and the publication. Sometimes they would give credit to me, but not you know, when you're running a unit and people are working, professionals are working in the unit under you, they get the credit, and they should get the credit. So,
Totally agree. Totally agree. So what was the most interesting thing that project that you worked on with the Bureau of Mines?
oh, I evaluated a coal mine in Utah that had made an application for some financing with, I think it was SBA, some Small Business Association. And so I evaluated the mine and the market and determined that he couldn't sell the coal. The coal was to go to a particular power plant. I talked to the power plant and they were not interested in this particular mine's coal for technical reasons. The coal didn't quite suit their needs. And so I reported that, and it really caused an uproar because from this coal operator, because the government turned him down on his application for financing. And that was, with all the shouting going on there, that was interesting.
Yeah, sure. I see that you have a master's degree in mineral economics. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yes. The Bureau of Mines was, the start of the Bureau of Mines was because of coal mine disasters, and the Bureau of Mines started in 1910. And for a long time after that, it was coal dust explosions, suppression, gas suppression, anything to stop these truly disastrous accidents in coal mines. But the coal mines evolved over the years, and it still did that, but got quite a bit into rock mechanics, became very expert and the world's greatest experts in rock mechanics and economics of producing minerals from lots of different deposits. And so economic and environmental aspects became a large focus of the Bureau of Mines. And the economics, we had an assistant director that was pushed economics. His name was Bill Vogeley. And I was considered one of the up-and-coming engineers at the time. Colorado School of Mines started a program teaching mineral economics. And I was the second person to go through that program. And of course, this was while I was working for the Bureau of Mines. I went through and got a BS in mineral economics from Colorado School of Mines because it seemed so applicable to what we were doing in the Bureau of Mines.
Mm-hmm.
I was the second person to get a master's degree in that program.
So during your academic years, did any professors or any either Texas or at Mines, any people stand out in your education?
And in my undergraduate years, I had a professor whose name was Guy Ingersoll. He was out of Minnesota, the Iron Range, and he kind of took me under his wing. There was another professor in the geology department named Bill Strain. He was just an outstanding professor. You know, you have a lot of different professors, and you learn a lot from them. But every now and then, an outstanding one pops up and sort of takes you under their arm. And this is a man named Bill Strain. It was an outstanding professor at UTEP, the University of Texas, El Paso. He's retired now.
As you were working at the Bureau of Mines, I think you mentioned to me before we started this interview that you were moved over into Ohio for a position?
Yes. The state of Ohio in 1972 passed a very strong strip mining law that pertained to coal strip mining. The state didn't really have in-house technical expertise in that topic. And so the Department of Interior and the Bureau of Mines was part of the Department of Interior, needed to have, Interior had no expertise either because there was no federal law at that time. So it needed to have some expertise. And so the Bureau of Mines sent me to what's called the Intergovernmental Personnel Act to Ohio to assist in the implementation of this strong strip mining law. It was a strong law. I was to be the assistant chief, assistant under the guy that ran the program to help him from a technical aspect. After I got there, this person became ill, and so they asked me if I would I do the program. So I did. I became the chief, and I was there 2 years. That was the most amazing 2 years I think I ever had, because you're in state government in a politically controversial position. I had to do all, not being experienced in politics, not being experienced in that topic at all, but all of a sudden I was in And I mean, I was really, I got sued where I had to make appearance in front of what was called the Reclamation Board of Review. That's where the first level of the influence, first level of lawsuits. I was, and during the 2 years I was there, I was in front of that board 14 times. And I was in front of the state legislature, committees in the House, committees in the Senate. I don't know, I lost how many times, but it was almost always on short notice. Like a call would come in, Ray, we need you down here in front of the House committee. Oh, okay, so it's a couple of miles to drive down there. And without preparation, you make a statement. You know, the chairman of the committee asks us, well, what do you have to say about some issue? And so you say what you have to say. And so it was 2 years, a very good experience, but a very heavy. There was a heavy experience. So, and then after the 2 years was up, I went back to the Bureau of Mines, and shortly after that, they promoted me to be the head of. I was chief of the Intermountain Field Operations Center, which is quite a nice, significant position in the Bureau of Mines. At a later date, the Federal Surface Mining Control and Reclamation Act of 1977 passed, and they tapped me to be one of the regional directors at Kansas City, Missouri, because of my experience in doing regulation of coal strip mines,
From the Ohio
from
position.
Ohio, yes. Of course, I had a lot of mining industry experience.
But there wasn't a lot of regulatory experience, and
no, it was regulatory in Ohio,
right.
but not in the Bureau of Mines. The Bureau of Mines was the only agency in the federal government that had had the mining industry as its mission to make sure it was successful. And it started out, with mine disasters. But after a while, it was in the 1970s, there was a reorganization in the Department of Interior that put the regulatory function of the Bureau of Mines over in Mesa, Mine Enforcement Safety Administration. And it was in Mesa for quite some time. And then at some point after that, Congress decided to take the function of Mesa and put it over into labor and changed its name to MSHA, Mine Safety and Health Administration. So the regulatory function went from, which was weak when it was in the Bureau of Mines, but it went to Mesa, it was much stronger, and then over into MSHA, which was even much more stronger. But the Bureau of Mines was left with a purpose of defending and helping and promoting the mining industry. And much to my chagrin, much later in the 90s, about 1994 or 5, this was a Newt Gingrich and his contract with America got the Bureau of Mines. And they at first, they didn't say the purpose was to get some federal agency. And they had in mind the Fish and Wildlife Service. But it turns out there's too many fishermen and there's too many hunters. And so the Fish and Wildlife Service has a powerful constituency. It was too powerful to eliminate. The Bureau of Mines constituency is the mining industry, and the mining industry didn't make a big enough stink to save the Bureau of Mines. And so it's out. It was not funded. They just didn't fund it. So with no money, you're out.
And I think many of us in the mining industry have regretted that day for a long time now.
It's a sad day. In 1994, 95, one of those. It was a really, really bad day for the mining industry.
Let's go back to the 70s. You were in the, if you will, the Interior Department in various positions, whether it was the Reclamation in Ohio or whether it was the Bureau of Mines, and you ultimately ended up at the OSM. So what was your role during the development of the Surface Mining Control and Reclamation Act and the promulgation of those laws and regulations?
Well, I started out as a regional director in Kansas City, and the early days of the implementation were really it was a kind of a rough time because the coal industry had to do a lot of things that they hadn't had to do before. Many of the underground coal industry didn't realize that they were even under the Surface Mining Control and Reclamation Act. Suddenly, inspectors showed up at these underground mines. Where's your permit? Where's your reclamation plan? What are you talking about? They didn't realize, and that's one of the reasons I think that the Surface Mining Control and Reclamation passed was the underground coal industry didn't oppose it that much. They thought it would be advantageous for them compared to the surface mining. Now, that's not all of the underground mines. Some of them are much more attuned, but a lot of the operators, especially small ones, didn't realize. And so it was politically, it was something else to be in an agency where you're enforcing laws and regulations that they don't like. And so there's a lot of screaming, but as it turns out, the most it's like 99.9% of the coal operators today realize, and they even will compete with each other on doing reclamation. We do a better job than you do. I can show you any number of places that you can't even tell a mine ever existed there because it's so topsoil is all back on it, natural vegetation's on it, lots of animals, deer, lots. You can't tell it was mined, and so what's to complain about that? Nothing. So. Now, as a regional director, you have quite a few people that work under you. So a lot of my job was working with the states because this was called, at the beginning, it was called the interim program. But each state that wanted to put together what they call a permanent program, and they submitted a very detailed, very comprehensive, and they submitted those to us, and we went through them fine-tooth comb and required some changes. For the most part, though, things were acceptable, and we then decided to recommend approval, and they were approved by the Secretary of Interior. And so much of my work was involved in dealing with the various states that submitted programs.
So you dealt with the approving the programs. Were there some states that had coal mines that were under your jurisdiction that were out, that you had to regulate directly?
We regulated directly until the permanent programs were approved. The first one in the United States that was approved was Texas. I got some kudos since it was in my region. The second state to be approved was Montana. Montana had existing, when the federal act passed, they had existing a pretty decent program before the federal act passed, and so it wasn't a big deal for them to change over. Montana was under the jurisdiction of the Denver office. So, but as you know, when you're head of the whatever program, whatever office, you have a lot of people under you that are doing the work, and you're overseeing it, and you worry, and you get blamed, but you have other people that are doing the actual work. So
I can see that you you must have had a lot of people who liked working with you, because you were giving credit to your subordinates rather than taking credit.
You know, OSM and the Burmans too has a lot of idealistic people that come in and work, and many of them you have to slap down a little bit. You know, they're overboard. So, but yes, I had a lot of good people, and had good relations. I've never had to terminate very many people. I have had to terminate a few.
It's always hard, isn't it?
Yes.
So, as assistant director of OSM, I see that you spent some time in Pittsburgh and in Kansas City.
Yes. Yes. At the end of my tour in Kansas City, it was because of the change. This was a huge change for the United States, not just where I was. Jimmy Carter was president of the United States, and he went to Ronald Reagan. And Ronald Reagan brought in James Watt as Interior Secretary. James Watt had his own ideas on how things. Reagan ended up having to fire James Watt, but Watt blew the agency apart. And the whole idea was transfer everybody. A lot of them will quit because they don't want to transfer, and it's happened. I was transferred to Pittsburgh. It's either transferred or out the door. I wasn't old enough to retire. It was nice not being old enough to retire. So I went to Pittsburgh. I headed up what was called a technical center, Eastern Technical Center. And we provided the technical support for all the inspection east of the Mississippi, all of Appalachia, which was a good experience for me because I hadn't really worked that much in Appalachia. And when you're in the coal business, that's good to get more knowledge on the coal industry in Appalachia. That went on for several years. And a director came in to head up OSM Ward. He needed somebody back in Colorado, and I leaped at the chance. I went back to Denver, and they changed the names of the titles of the positions from regional directors to assistant directors. Why? I don't know. But it's basically the same job, even though you have a little bit different title. So I became assistant director of OSM for the area west of the Mississippi, so including Alaska. And I went up to Yucca Valley's mine several times. I was up there, and in fact, I was all over Alaska, but during that time.
As you know, I started my career in coal, and I worked both in the West and the East, or at least as far as Illinois goes. But there was a very strong cultural difference between coal miners in Illinois, and I did some work in West Virginia, and those in Colorado and Utah. Did you see that from the regulatory side?
From the regulatory side, I think it's hard. It's really hard to say. I know, see, Ohio is really part of Appalachia. The coal part of Ohio borders Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Kentucky, and so it's Appalachia. Some of those coal miners would do the best work you could possibly imagine. There's always a few. It's like that 1/10 of 1%, east or west, that will fight you on everything. And so, even though culturally, in other ways, I can see many differences, but not really so much in the coal mining.
Did you ever see any influence or from the regulatory side when a mine was a union mine versus a non-union mine? Difference in performance?
What
union mine versus a non-union mine?
I never, unless you just happen to know, that was not a factor. Unless you just happen to know that this is a union mine. The mines that I worked at when I was in Oklahoma, actually in mines, they were both union mines. And that was a shock to me because I never knew that there was such a difference between union and management until you get there. And you get there and you realize there's a real difference. But that was not a part of either any of the time when it was with the Bureau of Mines or OSM. The union, non-union thing was not a factor.